We're going to introduce our special guests, which are some speakers from the Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency. We have Hannah Reid on the call, and we also have Morgan and Lisa. Lisa is a senior policy advisor, environment and resiliency, and Morgan is a policy advisor within resiliency, working within the ministry. And they're going to give us some information about the climate change policy 2023 to 2024, as they're currently in their consultancy period, and just to kind of get our information, or sorry, to get our opinions. And to basically answer any questions we have about that. So that being said, I'm going to pass over to you guys, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and you can take it away.
Okay, so let me just share my screen. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you so much. So like you had said, we're currently in public consultation for the draft climate change policy 2023 to 2040. That started in May, and at the end of this month, June 30th, that's when it'll be closing. So we're just gonna dive right in. So why do we need a climate change policy? So long story short, our climate is changing, and it's changing fast. So what this means is that we are and will continue to experience weather conditions and extreme events that we're not used to and we're not prepared for. And so these changes to our climate, they're creating challenges that put many of us at risk. We're already experiencing severe flooding in some areas. Maybe we can think of some. We're also experiencing warmer temperatures. We know that temperatures are higher now, and that these things are impacting our natural environment. So, for example, our coral reefs. So we know that our climate is expected to continue to change. So that means that we need to build resiliency and adaptability in every sector of society, in our daily lives. Human health and well-being in the Cayman Islands depends on the decisions that we make today. And so then that just means that if we continue to delay serious action on these issues, we're going to experience bigger obstacles, higher costs, and hardship as time goes on. So last May, the ministry had put out a knowledge, attitudes, and perception survey to the public, and a number of results came back. So I'm going to just highlight a few of those. So most respondents, 81%, said that they are extremely or very concerned that climate change will impact them in their lifetime. Almost half of the respondents believe that the government is primarily responsible for taking climate action. And finally, 94% of respondents said they would definitely or probably change how they live or work to help reduce the effects of climate change. So then that brings us to the benefits of the policy. Why is this policy, what's good about it? So first off, it establishes the what. So that's the heart of the issue, and approaches that we believe should be taken to address these issues. It also establishes a unified starting point from which government, businesses, households can base decisions specifically through a climate resiliency lens. The policy also recognizes climate change for the national security issue that it is. For example, the relationship between food, energy, and water. It also provides a really good opportunity to plan and shape where we want to be within the next 20 years. It also addresses impacts on our economy, which could affect people's livelihoods. And it also seeks to preserve our natural and cultural assets, which of course form the very basis of our sense of place, our community. So how did this policy come about? So there was a draft policy in 2011, and that stayed in draft form. So now we're some time later, and we have updated the policy to account for new insights and circumstances. We did a climate change risk assessment, and that was published at around the end of 2022. And so that was a really important document because it highlighted the climate risks that we're facing across various sectors. And so that risk assessment really drove a lot of the strategies that you'll find in the document. And so, the climate change risk assessment, it helps us ensure that the strategies that we're creating are relevant to our current needs, but also our future needs. And you can find more information about the risk assessment at that link there. So if you guys want to jot that down, we can also provide it at the end if you want. So just a little brief overview before we actually go into the policy, because the climate change risk assessment was so important for the development of the policy. So 50 risks were identified, and 18 were ranked as severe based on the data and all the different things that we have to support that ranking. And then we also found 16 moderate risks. And these top risks that we have here included risks to economy, society, and biodiversity and habitats. So within that analysis, they also found that 11 broad sectors are currently at risk for climate-related impacts. And of course, oftentimes these sectors are made more vulnerable by human activities. So these sectors included human settlements and infrastructure, human health, biodiversity, tourism, agriculture and fisheries, financial services, energy supply, transport, business, land use change, and waste management. So we have a lot of different things going on here. And this here off to the right, that's in the risk assessment. So if you want to take a detailed look at that, you can find that there. So our vision, this is the vision of the policy, and it's to create a climate resilient Cayman Islands that promotes and sustains vibrant communities, a thriving natural environment, and a robust economy where people can live their best lives now and for future generations. If you want to jump in at any point, you can take over. So this is the policy framework. So it's just basically the structure of the policy, the main components. So at the top, we have our vision, and then we have our 3 goals underneath that. So the first one is to reduce Cayman's vulnerability and enhance our resiliency to climate change. The second one is to promote sustainable, low or zero carbon economic activity. And the third goal is to establish a governance framework for climate action, which is future-focused, fair to all, accountable, and transparent. And so associated with those goals, and in order to achieve those goals, we have 7 policy objectives. And within each of those focus areas, we have strategies. So the 7 policy objectives, the first one is interwoven equity. Then we have robust economy, resilient infrastructure networks, healthy and resilient communities, livable built environment, harmony with nature, and integration and coordination. And then below that, we have our guiding principles. Those are all outlined in detail in terms of what they actually mean in the policy. And these guiding principles, they helped guide us, in creating the policy, ensuring that our strategies are in line with, these principles. So tools to make it happen. So these 5 tools that you see on the screen, these really help highlight the intent and the method of action of the different strategies that you'll see in the policy. And so, for example, in the policy, if you pick a strategy, you might see that it says, incentivize or, something like that. And so, or some of them you'll see are more focused towards something that government would do. And so basically these tools are embedded in the language of the strategies. So the first one we have lead by example, speaks to government leading the way on different initiatives. We have regulate, so that could involve looking at old laws and regulations and seeing where they can be updated, revised, and then perhaps even introducing new laws and regulations. Then we have tax and subsidize, so that in terms of the policy, that really speaks to incentivizing decisions that build resiliency in different respects. Then we have invest, so government, investing in research and different projects that bring us closer to achieving the goals of the policy. And last but not least, inform and educate. So that involves, all different things, public education campaigns, incorporating climate topics into the school curriculum, and so on. Okay, so like I said before, there are 7 policy objectives. And so the first one is interwoven equity. So this really speaks to ensuring that our vulnerable groups have the tools and support to sufficiently adapt. And we know that everyone is being impacted by climate change, but some individuals may experience these impacts differently. All depends on our individual circumstances. So, it's important that we have a good understanding of, and we're able to provide support to these groups, these vulnerable groups, through different means. So, for example, making sure we have effective emergency plans, appropriate financial and educational resources for them, improved health care, and opportunities to strengthen relationships and build self-efficacy. And so an example of a strategy from this area, just for example, encourage more in-district workshops and networking opportunities to build individual and household capacities and strengthen relationships amongst community members. Do you want to do the next one?
Sure. Okay, I'll jump in here. Thanks, Morgan. The next policy objective area is robust economy. And this speaks to creating a diverse, resilient economy that is able to withstand and recover the various climate change impacts that were identified in the climate change risk assessment that Morgan mentioned earlier. A resilient economy responds to risks, but it also takes advantage of opportunities that are available in different sectors of the economy to look at climate change, but look at climate change as something that could potentially be positive for people to move into in terms of livelihoods. So in that respect, it creates new and diverse modes of production for the economy and for people in different sectors to either upskill themselves or go in a completely different direction that they may be interested in going. And climate change just kind of maybe gives that catalyst for them to do that. But it also speaks to addressing the country's needs in terms of that change. It's important for us to consider the growing scale of the population as well, and to ensure that the economy is keeping pace with that, and that the cost of climate change impacts as it relates to that population increase is actually borne by a number of different sectors and not just one over the other. A prime example might be, for example, when we had to respond to COVID, and we found that the tourism sector really suffered as a result, and it was our financial services sector that sort of kept us afloat. So in that respect, climate change is very similar in terms of what we require to ensure a robust economy. So one of the strategies that's proposed in this area is exactly that, to diversify production towards more climate resilient and resource efficient crops and livestock to enhance our food security, as Morgan mentioned before, because climate change impacts the food, water, and energy nexus. And to be able to have that production be climate resilient, but to the point where it reduces any sort of impacts on biodiversity and other economic sectors. The next area is livable built environment. And this is really geared towards ensuring the safety of people who live in communities and built areas, and to ensure that they're as resilient as possible. for people who live there and for people who work there. So, of course, as I'm sure many of you know, the built environment is not just about animals and plants that are there, but really integration of those systems, those natural systems. So where possible, to protect and or enhance natural systems that are next to our built environments so that they would be able to enhance the sustainability as well as resiliency of those built areas. So one of the major risks that we found in the climate change risk assessment was the hazard of flooding. And as Morgan said earlier, there are areas of Grand Cayman in particular, but also areas of Cayman Brac that we know are suffering severe flooding when not only it comes to a major event like a hurricane, but even just more intense rainfall events that we know are going to continue as a result of climate change. So in this particular policy area, one of the strategies being proposed is to complete a multi-hazard risk assessment to really hone in and identify those high-risk areas and reform the National Development Plan and the Development and Planning Act and regulations so that appropriate development controls or design standards are built in to those processes, and we ensure that we don't create more vulnerable areas, or we address the areas that are already currently vulnerable, particularly to the hazard of flooding. In terms of the next policy area, which is healthy and resilient communities, this again focuses on safety of people, but specific to human health. And looking at communities that may be particularly underserved or already vulnerable as a result of exposure to climate hazards, particularly when it comes to high temperatures, because as Morgan said earlier, we know that we are already experiencing and will continue to experience warmer days, but also warmer nights, and what that might mean for communities that and groups that are particularly at risk of those hazards, and ensuring that any of the strategies that are in this particular area have co-benefits to them, benefits that nature can provide, but also improving our preparedness going forward, such as our emergency preparedness and response to those health implications and to the safety-related aspects of climate change impacts, particularly on vulnerable groups. So in that respect, as was probably mentioned before, there are a lot of cross-cutting sector specific strategies, but this is another one in terms of retrofitting our existing shelters. And shelters are designed for multi-purpose use and passive survivability with renewable energy systems, for example, to withstand Category 5 hurricanes and to facilitate post-disaster recovery. Moving on to the fifth policy area, resilient infrastructure networks. This particular area speaks to securing and strengthening infrastructure networks so that they're able to withstand and recover from natural hazards that are made worse by climate change impacts. And when we mean networks, we're talking about critical infrastructure that relates to the production or supply of electricity, potable water, and other services like telecommunications, to make sure that when we come to facing hazards, particularly when it comes to things like hurricanes, that we continue to have these networks functioning and working, and if not, that the downtime with them are shortened, so that we have the least amount of disruptions to people's lives and to businesses. And an example of a strategy here might be to undertake a feasibility analysis for the expansion of a centralized sewage system for the islands, considering whether decentralized operations are appropriate for resiliency or not. We have seen in the past where the sewage system have failed, particularly during incidences of hurricanes, but also of king tides that are becoming more and more intense in terms of their height and in terms of the longevity that they last for. And we found that that the sewage networks, as well as the deep water wells, are not functioning as they should. So this is one strategy that can potentially address that existing problem, but also look towards the future to ensure that it is not an ever-increasing costly measure that we have to contend with in the islands. The sixth policy area is harmony with nature. And this is ensuring a holistic approach is taken to climate change, adaptation, and resiliency, ensuring the social and economic well-being of communities by safeguarding nature and allowing nature to do a very primary function, which is to help us protect ourselves. And in doing so, we can lessen the impact on nature in order to be able to bounce back in a resilient manner in terms of whenever an event happens, and that they're in a better position to be able to bounce back that much quicker. So, of course, the benefits of this comes through things like responsible natural resource management, the use of nature-based solutions, conservation plans that are built into the National Conservation Act, and of course, the ever-important public education and awareness component of building nature and protecting natural resources, and continuing, of course, with research and monitoring of our natural systems to ensure that they're actually functioning the way we need and we want them to. So an example of a strategy in this area is to continue to expand the terrestrial protected area system in line with not just our aspirational goals in the country, but with the UK's goal of 30% protection by the year 2030. And that is part of a global commitment as well to ensuring that all habitat types and ecosystem services are adequately represented within that 30%. We're pretty much there when it comes to our marine environment. I think we have something in the order of 48 to 50% protected, but we're lagging behind on the terrestrial side of things. So hence this strategy recommendation here. And last but not least, the policy area that I believe has the most amount of strategies, and because it is so important, is integration and coordination. And this policy area speaks to bridging the gap within and between government, the private sector, and communities that are vitally needed to achieve the vision that Morgan mentioned at the top of the presentation. So integrating and coordinating actions across these various entities is a primary component within all of the strategies that are in this section, vital to building and keeping and maintaining the resiliency of the country in all the economic sectors. Tools such as risk assessment screening processes for projects that can help guide decision makers to ensure that the decisions that we are taking build that resiliency into each and every decision and lower the risks of climate change to our people and our economy. And reviewing the policy on a regular basis with stakeholder input from groups such as yourselves is obviously part and parcel of ensuring that the policy stays aligned with and is responsive to the changing needs of the country. So one example of a strategy in this section is to ensure that private stakeholders and firms identify their responsibilities and their liabilities to climate change and manage their risks and propose responses to them in light of the wider initiatives that government is taking in order for us to ensure that we are aligned in our goals and that we are recovering at the same pace in the private sector as well as in the government sectors. So what's next for this policy? As Morgan mentioned before, we are still currently in our public consultation period. which runs until the 30th of June. We have done a slew of public presentations such as these in the various districts in Grand Cayman. We have tonight East End, and on Thursday Northside left to complete, but we've been to the Sister Islands in late May. We will also be doing a series of focus group sessions such as this with members of the private sector that we spoke about, as well as internally within government to continue those networking sessions and focus groups, and we hope to complete all of that by the 30th of June. We would encourage you all to go to our website, which I think you'll see on the next slide, and fill out the digital feedback form so that we can capture your impression of this policy, as well as to just hope that this has broadened your horizons in the subject of climate change. By next month, we hope that the final draft version can go to Cabinet for approval, and that by the end of the month, we can start working on the much needed implementation plan that will sit alongside the strategy. So here is the information again. If you go to gov.ky/climate change policy, you'll find hopefully everything you need to know about the climate change policy and the public consultation process. You can download the policy there. You can also download, as Morgan said before, the climate change risk assessment, which is a pretty hefty document at about 163 pages, but we also have a summary document that's much more digestible, about 23 pages long. And also, you'll see the link there to the SurveyMonkey instrument, which is the online feedback survey that we hope you will find a little bit of time to complete. It's only about 22 questions long, so we hope that you'll be able to share your feedback with us through that. Otherwise, if you have any other queries or any other comments about the climate change policy that you would like to give to us, you can email us at climate@gov.ky. And I think with that, we are now happy to take any questions you might have or any commentary that you'd like to provide to us.
Thank you guys so much for that. I have one question. With the implementation document that sits alongside the strategic plan, will that also be kind of publicly available before it's published, or does that need cabinet? Is that kind of like a joint cabinet approval instrument, or do they have to get approval differently? Is there similar consultation with the implementation plan?
Thank you for the question. At this point in time, we're not sure. We're definitely hoping that the implementation plan, once we have it fully drafted, will be going out to the public. We can say with a great level of confidence that a lot of the feedback that we've had to date has been on the strategies, but at a more querying level in terms of, well, how do you really plan to, achieve this strategy? Are you thinking along the lines of X, Y, Z? And we've been able to thank the contributor for that suggestion and start to record those types of comments and action items, because we really do feel that some of them do sit within an implementation plan rather than a higher level strategy. So it is our hope that we will get the go-ahead from Cabinet, or at least from the minister, to put that implementation plan back to the public, because I think we're hearing loud and clear that is the type of document that they would also like to be able to input on before everything is done and dusted, and we can say that we have a full-blown climate change.
Oh, the call appeared to have dropped them.
No.
Hopefully they'll rejoin shortly once they realize that it's happened to me before. Sometimes there's just the Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
But
hopefully they'll be able to jump back on.
yeah, definitely. Let's have another question in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring the chat because sometimes people don't want to turn their mic on. And so that is very fair. And I'll just field out those questions as well. Mm, mm, mm.
I think I can maybe address the question about the points of placing higher on the risk assessment,
Yeah.
just from my personal perspective, because so what we did for the climate change risk assessment was the first step was that we had scientists from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology and CFAS, the Centre for Ecology, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science, I think it is. Those two organizations had scientists that were working with our teams, and they first did comprehensive desktop research to try and compile all of the information they could on what the risks were and what level of data was available. So for some of the risks, we have local data, decades of local data, for example, our weather monitoring, our tide gauge data, our rainfall data. And then for others, there's either regional information or there's global data sets. So then what they did was they had this draft report, this draft list of long risks. I think there were about 52. And then what they did was they brought it to us to ground truth. So we convened a 2-day workshop that had, I think, over 60 people take part. And it included representatives from private sector, public sector, nonprofits, academia. And we literally got together in a room for 2 days and went through every single risk. And they were reviewed, ranked, and scored based on, how severe are the impacts going to be? How many people or how much of the islands are they expected to impact? How severe are those impacts expected to be? And what is our confidence in the available scientific data? So, for example, for a risk that we know is already happening, that we're seeing across all 3 islands, and that we're very confident in the data we have, those risks were then ranked higher. And the risks were also ranked like against each island. So, for some risks, they're happening maybe in Grand Cayman and Little Cayman, but not Cayman Brac. Or, we expect the impacts to be different. So they were given a score against each island, and then those combined scores came together. And I thought, I think there were some of them that we were expecting because we've just seen them. We've seen them in terms of the impacts on our turtle distribution, and also the sex of the turtles, because that's related to sand temperature. We've seen the impacts. We're seeing the impacts now on our coral reefs and the emergence of novel diseases like the stony coral tissue loss disease. So those risks, I don't think we were expecting to. We knew they were going to be serious risks, and those were a given. But when we were going through this process, when we got to something like the impacts on sewerage systems, everybody, that went up a lot higher than everybody in the room thought it would. But because we have seen it before, and then it became something that is that maybe was on the periphery of our minds. But when everybody got into that room together and said, actually, we know that this is already an issue. We know that sea level rise is going to continue to have an issue. It's going to continue to make this an issue and exacerbate it further. So actually, this needs to be ranked up there quite high. And in that list of severe risks that Morgan put up on the screen, there were 18 risks that were considered severe, and they were split pretty evenly between environment, like biodiversity and habitats, and then our economy and society. And I think some of them are risks that we've already seen before, but again, because of the impacts of climate change, they're just going to exacerbate those existing issues. And I think that was a very interesting experience to be part of. And we were even able to add some new risks working with the scientists. So, for example, we brought up the fact that oh, Morgan, no, we can't hear you. Sorry. Morgan isn't joined up. Oh, there you go. Sorry, we're just answering one of the questions in the chat about the points that place higher on the risk assessment than we perhaps thought they would. And I was explaining the process for the risk assessment, the workshop we did, and then I think the teams, everybody who was in the room when those sewerage risk was, shot up to, I think it was 75, because everybody recognized we were seeing it, but it hadn't perhaps been something we thought was going to be as high, as severe. And so, yeah, we even added a couple risks during the workshop, like risks to our invertebrate pollinators that hadn't initially been on the list because of that exercise with ground truthing with local experts. And then Lisa, there's another question here, which I think you might be better placed to answer. I know there was a lot about whether the government envisions itself establishing partnerships with governments of other low-lying islands that may not yet have comprehensive climate change policies. I know you and Morgan did so much research on climate change policies around the world and the development of this draft. So I wondered if you might be able to speak to that question.
Sorry, I don't know if we will be or if we have done, but the last go round of the policy, we had established a working relationship with the other UK overseas territories in the Caribbean. And so some of them are at various stages of implementing and maybe even now updating their national climate change adaptation strategies, and maybe they're more comprehensive strategies now, looking at mitigation side of it as well, which is what this 2023 strategy for us is aiming to do as well. So yes, there would be, we have been looking at all of those strategies. We have also looked at the ones for the UK Crown dependencies, particularly those that are similar to Cayman in that they are signed up to the UNFCCC convention, or the Kyoto Protocol in the past, which is of course sunsetting in light of the Paris Agreement, and those that have actually had the Paris Agreement extended to them, such as Gibraltar and I think Isle of Man. I believe Bailiwick of Jersey is next. So we have been looking in particular at those jurisdictions on the climate mitigation side of things and their net zero targets and so forth, as we've been working along with another unit here in the ministry, the energy policy unit, because the national energy policy is also undergoing an update to their policy as well as to their implementation plan. And it's wonderful that these two policies for us are coming at about the same time, so that we can have alignment there with the two policies, but also the targets, particularly for mitigation side of things, can sit nicely alongside each other. We also have had quite a good working relationship with Jamaica, although it's not an overseas territory, obviously, but we drew a lot from their 2015, but also their 2021 climate change policy. And I continue to maintain relationships with the people in the climate change ministry there, but also our national weather services and our hazard management unit have established relationships with their climate studies group that produce a lot of the regional regional climate models that feed into pretty much all of our climate change work across the region and on up to the IPCC. So we have a lot of networking going on in the region. Outside of the region, in terms of other small islands in the Pacific, we used to have those types of relationships in different fora. I'm not so sure now. I can't speak to any that since I've joined the ministry last year, we've really cultivated on that level, but we certainly do keep our eye on specific jurisdictions, especially those that have blue economy strategies like the Seychelles, and what they're doing to utilize climate finance mechanisms, as well as things like debt for nature swaps. So maybe not so much in terms of the climate change sphere, but in other biodiversity aspects, and of course the climate crises and the biodiversity crises are sort of intertwined, as you all may know. So yes, we do definitely look at other jurisdictions and what they're doing there, and any lessons that can be learnt from them and applied to us.
Thank you so much for answering that question. I think a lot of that answers everything that you had in there. I also want to welcome Gabriella, Colleen, and Dejea for joining the call. If you guys don't mind just maybe saying hi in the chat, and perhaps if you guys have any questions, you can pop those in the chat as well. If not, that's completely okay. Maybe you just wanted to come on and hear what was going on. And I have both of the links, the survey and also the link to the other kind of document that Hannah, you posted in the chat. We will also be sharing those within our members WhatsApp group, so that people that haven't attended the call can still complete the survey if they want to do so. So that will also be shared with our members. And Gabrielle says, reading through the risk assessment now to see if I have any questions.
Just want to say a hello personally to Dejea. She worked with us last summer, and hopefully you'll be visiting us again soon over this summer, if not as an intern, but just popping into the ministry to say hi. And the results of your work from last year are definitely paying forward. So thank you very much, Dejea.
Oh, that's lovely. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you, Miss Lisa, she says. Thank you so much today for joining the call. And we really appreciate you guys coming. And yeah, I'll give just 1 or 2 more minutes to see if any questions pop up.
Yeah, I've got a question. Let me just figure out how to word it though. I just kind of want to ask before Anna left, and I'm trying to read through the risk assessment, and I hate reading, to be honest. So how do you, it says medium agreement and like severe agreement. What does that exactly mean? So is it, because obviously I think it's a bit subjective whether you think something's going to be quite a high impact. So yeah, could you just elaborate on that?
Okay, I don't have it entirely in front of me, but I think I understand the question. And yes, to answer your question quite honestly, a lot of it is subjective. And that's why we had an entire group of technical experts from within the jurisdiction, within the Cayman Islands, as well as across the region, that came together and literally went through each risk one by one to determine the severity of what we thought was the severity of the risk. And a lot of this was based on local knowledge and or literature and studies and analysis that had been done in Cayman, in the region, in other small islands that were comparable to us in terms of either size or geological formation or whatever the particular risk was pertaining to. And then we had to rate it. We had to rank it. And it was not an easy exercise. It took us 2 days to get through the 50 risks. And yeah, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth on some of them, particularly where it pertained to risks that were identified, but maybe we didn't have a great deal of evidentiary basis to make a decision on whether the risk would be severe if it did continue to be an issue for us in the Cayman Islands, whether it would be something that we would see the risk increasing in 5, 10, 50 years time, or whether the confidence level just simply was not there yet to make that call. And hence why a combination of those factors put them into the lower risk category, which are the remaining 16 risks that were there out of that 50. So this policy doesn't really cover those risks, but it's not to say that they may not rise to the level of being moderate or severe in future. And so that this is why it's important that we have a climate risk assessment every few years, as they do in the UK. They have it on a 5-year cycle, just like their carbon budgeting for their net zero strategy. And those climate risk assessments feed into their next iteration of their mitigation strategies, as well as their climate adaptation program and plans.
Great. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Gabriella.
Yeah, it did. I have a follow-up question now. So I think, I can't remember who said, but we have like decades and decades worth of certain data. I was just wondering if there's any data that we don't have that kind of was made apparent during this risk assessment, thinking, oh, we don't have this much data. And are we gonna, I mean, I'm assuming that we're going to be obtaining more of that data if we don't have any.
Yeah, I think if memory serves, the ones that scored low risk were like the pelagics. We don't have a lot of information on our pelagics, but we actually do have right now our Department of Environment that has a Darwin grant project going into its second year. Actually, it's a 2-year project, and it's actually highlighting a number of species that we either didn't know we had in the Cayman Islands at the deep sea strata and various different strata between the surface and deep sea, or we didn't know we had them in one areas of the islands versus another. So, and not just fish, but we're talking about other marine species as well. So that has been actually some exciting news, and that will feed into this next cycle of the risk assessment. Like I said, it's coming a few years early now, but obviously that database and that data set will sit there with the Department of Environment and be shared more broadly, no doubt, with the UK government, as it's a Darwin funded grant. So that's just one example I can think of off the top of my head. But the strategies that we mentioned, and when you have a chance to look at the policy in more depth, you'll see that there are research specific strategies throughout that will help build that evidence base that we may be lacking in some of those areas that we talked about, as well as some of the areas of the risk assessment that we know were a bit deficient. So we're hoping to attack it from both sides, to not wait for the next risk assessment to help us inform these decisions, but we have that research and monitoring and updating built into the climate change policy itself.
Thank you.
Great.
My pleasure.
And we have one more question. What is the expected timeline for the final release of the climate change policy from DG?
Well, we hope that it will be end of July, that we'll be able to have that released after it goes through, after we finalize it from all the wonderful feedback we're going to get from your group and others, and take it up to Cabinet and have it Cabinet approved. And then hopefully we'll be able to release it end of July and be able to start on the implementation plan.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dejay.
I'm not sure if we have any further questions. I'm also not sure who came for the climate policy consultation or the semester roundup, so I don't want to end the call without having a little bit of a check-in for those that maybe came for that. So if there are any final questions, please do let us know for either Hannah, Lisa, or Morgan. I'm sure they'd love to hear it. Thank you guys so much for coming on as well and just giving your time to this group. We really, really appreciate it. And yes, we will put it was climate@gov.ky for any further questions directed to yourselves, correct? Okay, I'll put that in the group. Just so that people have that. climate.gov.ky. Yeah, does anyone have any further questions or comments for our guests today? Yes, we all say a big thank you from Cayman Connection. So Zoe had to pop off just earlier today. She gives a big thank you to everyone that came on today. Thanks to the speakers, myself as well. And is it correct in thinking you'll be back for the member call as well on the 21st of June?
Yeah.
Or am I mixing that
That's
up?
right. Yes.
That is right,
Yes,
exactly. So if you
yes.
guys will have any further questions, you want to see these lovely faces again, you guys can tune into the member welcome call on the 21st. If you're interested, spread the word to friends and family. For those that aren't students, obviously, have probably a lot to say as well about the climate policy consultation. So I want to say also a personal thank you as a young Caymanian. It feels so good that we're getting consulted on these types of projects. It's a big change from a couple of years ago. So yeah, a big thank you from Cayman Connection and to the ministry. Thank you so much for taking your time out and coming to speak to us. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you so much.
And thank you in advance for all the feedback we're going to get from you.
Definitely.
And yes, please look at it as not our policy here in the ministry and with our partner agencies that we named before in the presentation, but think of it as your policy, because you're the next generation and you're the ones that are going to be on the front lines even more so than us. Maybe I'm speaking of myself, not so much Morgan, who is perhaps more your generation than mine. But yes, please, this is our policy as a country, and we want to ensure that we're starting off on the best foot possible. So thank you very much for having us, and we look forward to your feedback.
Thank you so much, guys. We'll be sure to send out all the links. And if anybody has any further questions about contact information or links, please get in touch with Cayman Connection because we can forward that out to everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.